Now that it's all over, I may as well admit that there was a time during the affair of rock-metaller Todd when I thought that Jeeves was going to let me down. Silly of me, of course, knowing him as I do, but that's what I thought. It seemed to me that the man had the appearance of being baffled. The Rocky Todd business broke loose early one morning in spring. I was in bed, restoring the physique with my usual 9 hours of the dreamless, when the door flew open and somebody prodded me in the lower ribs and began to shake the bedclothes in an unpleasant manner. And after blinking a bit and generally pulling myself together, I located Rocky, and my first impression was that it must have been some horrid dream. Rocky, you see, lived down on Long Island somewhere, miles away from New York, and not only that, but he had told me himself more than once that he never got up before 12, and seldom earlier than 1. Constitutionally the laziest young devil in America, he had hit on a walk in life which enabled him to go to the limit in that direction. He was a poet. At least, he wrote poems when he did anything, but most of his time, as far as I could make out, he spent in a sort of trance. He told me once that he could sit on a fence, watching a worm, and wondering what on earth it was up to, for hours at a stretch. He had his scheme of life worked out to a fine point. About once a month, he would take 3 days writing a few poems. The other 329 days of the year, he rested. You know, there was enough money in poetry to support a chappie, even in the way in which Rocky lived. But it seems that if you stick to exhortations to young men to lead the strenuous life and don't shove in any rhymes, American editors fight for the stuff. Rocky showed me one of his things once. It began, "Be, the past is dead, tomorrow is not born, be today, today. Be with every nerve, with every fibre, with every drop of your red blood, be. There were 3 more verses, and the thing was printed opposite the frontispiece of a magazine with a sort of scroll round it, and a picture in the middle of a fairly nude chappie with bulging muscles giving the rising sun the glad eye. Rocky said they gave him $100 for it, and he stayed in bed till 4 in the afternoon for over a month. As regarded the future, he was pretty solid, owing to the fact that he had a moneyed aunt tucked away somewhere in Illinois. It's a curious thing how many of my pals seem to have aunts and uncles who are their main source of supply. There's Bicky, for one, with his uncle, the Duke of Chiswick. Corky, who until things went wrong looked to Alexander Worple, the bird specialist, for sustenance. And I shall be telling a story shortly of a dear old friend of mine, Oliver Sipperley, who had an aunt in Yorkshire. These things cannot be mere coincidence. They must be meant. What I'm driving at is that Providence seems to look after the chumps of this world, and personally I'm all for it. I suppose the fact is that having been snootered from infancy upwards by my own aunts, I like to see that it is possible for these relatives to have a better and a softer side. However, this is more or less of a sidetrack. Coming back to Rocky, what I was saying was that he had this aunt in Illinois, and as he had been named rock-metaller after her, which in itself, you might say, entitled him to substantial compensation, and was her only nephew, his position looked pretty sound. He told me that when he did come into the money, he meant to do no work at all, except perhaps an occasional poem recommending the young man, with life opening out before him with all its splendid possibilities, to light a pipe and shove his feet up on the mantelpiece. And this was the man who was prodding me in the ribs in the grey dawn. "Read this, Bertie," babbled old Rocky. I could just see that he was waving a letter or something equally foul in my face. "Wake up and read this." I can't read before I've had my morning tea and a cigarette. I groped for the bell. Jeeves came in, looking as fresh as a dewy violet. It's a mystery to me how he does it. Tea, Jeeves." "Very good, sir." I found that Rocky was surging round with his beastly letter again. "Well, what is it?" I said. "What on earth's the matter?" "Read it." "I can't. I haven't had my tea." "Well, listen then." Who's it from?" "My aunt." At this point, I fell asleep again. I woke to hear him saying, "So, What on earth am I to do?" Jeeves flowed in with the tray, like some silent stream meandering over its mossy bed, and I saw daylight. "Read it again, Rocky, old top," I said. "I want Jeeves to hear it. Mr. Todd's aunt has written him a rather rummy letter, Jeeves, and we want your advice." "Very good, sir." He stood in the middle of the room, registering devotion to the cause, and Rocky started again. "My dear Rockmetaler, I have been thinking things over for a long while, and I have come to the conclusion that I have been very thoughtless to wait so long before doing what I have made up my mind to do now. What do you make of that, Jeeves?" "It seems a little obscure at present, sir, but no doubt it becomes clearer at a later point in the communication." "Proceed, old scout," I said, champing my bread and butter. "You know how all my life I have longed to visit New York and see for myself the wonderful, gay life of which I have read so much. I fear that now it will be impossible for me to fulfill my dream. I am old and worn out. I seem to have no strength left in me." "Sad, Jeeves, what?" "Extremely, sir." "Sad nothing," said Rocky. "It's sheer laziness. I went to see her last Christmas, and she was bursting with health. Her doctor told me himself that there was nothing wrong with her whatever, but she will insist that she's a hopeless invalid, so he has to agree with her. She's got a fixed idea that the trip to New York would kill her. So, though it's been her ambition all her life to come here, she stays where she is." "Rather like the chappie whose heart was in the Highlands a-chasing of the deer, Jeeves." "The cases are in some respects parallel, sir." "Carry on, Rocky, dear boy." "So, I have decided that, if I cannot enjoy all the marvels of the city myself, I can at least enjoy them through you. I suddenly thought of this yesterday, after reading a beautiful poem in the Sunday paper about a young man who had longed all his life for a certain thing, and won it in the end only when he was too old to enjoy it. It was very sad, and it touched me. A thing," interpolated Rocky bitterly, "that I've not been able to do in 10 years. As you know, you will have my money when I am gone, but until now I have never been able to see my way to giving you an allowance. I have now decided to do so, on one condition. I have written to a firm of lawyers in New York, giving them instructions to pay you quite a substantial sum each month. My one condition is that you live in New York and enjoy yourself as I have always wished to do. I want you to be my representative, to spend this money for me as I should do myself. I want you to plunge into the gay, prismatic life of New York. I want you to be the life and soul of brilliant supper parties. Above all, I want you, indeed I insist on this, to write me letters at least once a week, giving me a full description of all you are doing and all that is going on in the city, so that I may enjoy at second hand what my wretched health prevents my enjoying for myself. Remember that I shall expect full details, and that no detail is too trivial to interest your affectionate aunt, Isabel Rockmetaler." "What about it?" said Rocky. "What about it?" I said. "Yes, what on earth am I going to do?" It was only then that I really got on to the extremely rummy attitude of the chappie, in view of the fact that a quite unexpected mess of good cash had suddenly descended on him from a blue sky. To my mind it was an occasion for the beaming smile and the joyous whoop. Yet here the man was, looking and talking as if fate had swung on his solar plexus. It amazed me. "Aren't you bucked?" I said. "Bucked? If I were in your place I should be frightfully braced. I consider this pretty soft for you." He gave a kind of yelp, stared at me for a moment, and then began to talk of New York in a way that reminded me of